I'd like to welcome you to the fourth lecture in the Knowlton School of Architecture Practice Series. John Ronan received his bachelor's degree at the University of Michigan, his home state, and his Master of Architecture at the Harvard Graduate School of Design. He then opened his practice, John Ronan Architects, in Chicago in 1999. I should introduce myself. My name is KB Jones. It's a great pleasure for me to be here to welcome John tonight. John is also Associate Professor of Architecture at the Illinois Institute of Technology, where he heads the Advanced Studios program and is currently chairing the search for the Dean at IIT. When you go to John Ronan's website, you find the work organized in 5 categories: institutional, residential, interiors, urbanism. None of those are surprising. And then there's a 5th category: speculative. And I appreciate the notion of speculative work because it shows a great deal, I think, about the level of research that's involved in the work of the practice of architecture of John Ronan Architects. John's work has been very widely published and exhibited and awarded, and I won't go through tonight all the series of awards of all of his works. They are noteworthy. My sense from looking at the work is that they've been sought out and discovered. It would take all of the time of one's practice if you put the time into applying for every one of those awards. My research team set out for Chicago last summer, and we were very interested in seeing the Gary Comer Youth Center, built in 2006 and the recipient of the Comer Science and Education Foundation 2006 Patron of the Year Award from the Chicago Architectural Foundation. 2007, it was awarded the first prize of the Richard H. Dryhouse Foundation for the award for architectural excellence in community design, and in 2001 received the Rudy Bruner Award for urban excellence, the Silver Medal Award. The reason we were interested in the project, though, was really based on what we had learned about the role that the building had played in identifying a community, and in particular with a green roof project. The building then later evolved and spawned its own school, a 45,000 square foot school that's part of it. And when one looks at these 2 very beautiful and very elegant modern buildings, one sees an elegant modernist who is not bashful about color. It's also noteworthy in the works of these schools and a series of projects that John Ronan Architects has received in public schools to think about the fact that schools are maybe not the first place we look at for new ideas in architecture, but in the experience that John's had working in a number of urban public schools, he's talked about the fact that to design a good school, you have to take fear out of the equation. The building we were able to see and really stumbled upon was the Poetry Foundation building, a 22,000 square foot small building in its context in Chicago's North River neighborhood surrounded by housing towers. Many have talked about the building, and everybody likes to call it a built poem. It holds 30,000 non-circulating volumes of poetry. I think what struck me when I first saw the building is how much exterior urban space is made public with a kind of public garden that's held back from the public street with a beautiful veil-like edge made of corrugated oxidized zinc. At the opening for the building this summer, the poet laureate Billy Collins had a lot of things to say about the building, but the one that struck me as somewhat poignant was this. It's true that as you walk through the building, you get many angles from which to look at the interior of the building. So if you walk 30 feet in some direction and turn around, you're seeing an entire reconfiguration. And that's actually quite accurate physical representation of what a poem does. At this point, let's let John's work speak for itself, and join me in welcoming John Ronan.
Hi, thanks, KB. Since your lecture series is entitled Practice, I thought I would give to the students a kind of a short history of modern practice. This is, if you were practicing maybe 30 years ago, the diagram of the profession might look like this, with the owner and the architect and contractor at different corners of a triangle. And I suppose the arrows here are flows of information, most likely. But also note that the circles are the same size. They're all equal in this equilateral triangle. What's happened over the years is first, the architect has kind of been moving further and further away from the owner. First, the advent of the program manager, and then the owners, consultants, branding managers, and so forth. So if you had to diagram the profession today, this is a diagram. This is how I would diagram it. So in the center here is the owner. Okay, this is the program manager here, and these are kind of the owner's consultants, many of whom now come onto the project before the architect is even engaged. Okay, so this is the general contractor and subcontractors out here. The architect's way out here. These are the consultants kind of revolving around the architect and wondering when their next project is coming. This kind of treacherous band of asteroids is lawyers between the architect and the owner. So the point being that along with this diagram changing, the profession has changed and the role of the architect has changed, okay? And we have to, the professions is something of a crossroads right now, and we have to kind of figure out how we get sort of back toward the center of things. And one way is the architect now has to think more about the how, or about how as much as what. So as an example from practice, this is a project we recently did. It's a public high school, and we wanted this, it was a public high school, so when you're doing public work, it's, there's a lot of kind of mandates. There's kind of a thick book of standards you have to follow, everything from room sizes to the materials you can use, and the building had to be masonry. So what can we do with masonry? So the idea, the kind of formal idea of the building is really this very thick masonry wall that snakes through the site and creates the three areas of the school. We wanted to do it in this sort of striated brick pattern so your eye would kind of wrap around these corners. So we presented this drawing to the mason, and he said, well, you know, it's like, I'm going to need a template for this. Otherwise, it's going to be 3 times as expensive because my guys get paid to lay bricks, not to think. Okay, so that was off the table, okay? It was too expensive, so we had to do a running bond, or we said, well, wait a minute, what if we think about this? So we researched the bricks and went back to the brick yard, and they said, we found out that they would palletize or place on a pallet the bricks in any order or any way that we wanted, okay? So working backwards from the desired pattern, we came up with this configuration of a pallet of bricks such that a mason could grab one in an unthinking way and put it into the wall, and our desired pattern would result. These are some early studies. Sounds easy, was actually very difficult. We spent about 3 weeks working this out. Here's kind of one of the failures. You see, we had to figure out what happened when you came to a window, how that would mess up the pattern, how we came to the corner. Once we thought we had that figured out, we built a little mock-up here on site. Here's one of the pallets of bricks coming to the site. And then we got it reasonably worked out. And then the next challenge was that the masons worked 12 to 15 abreast, working at the same time, almost like typewriters going along a line, doing another line, another line. So we used the control joints that were necessary in the brick wall to control the area of work for each mason. Then each mason got his own pallet of bricks. And this is kind of the resulting wall, which we were pretty happy about. But it just kind of illustrates the new kind of work one has to do. Maybe 20 years ago, we could have just, you know, told them to do it that way and gone off and had a martini. But it doesn't work that way anymore. This is a prototype high school, I should mention. This is a little more on that project. The idea was to design a very compact urban high school that would fit on a single city block in Chicago, measuring 266 feet by 600 feet. So we would kind of slide these little volumes back and forth. Again, it's mostly about configuration and circulation because the classrooms are somewhat dictated. So here's kind of an entry plaza here. This is a reading garden off the library, and then this would either be parking or athletic fields, depending on where the school was located. This was the first one out of the gate. This is South Shore High School, not far from the Gary Comer Youth Center. Here, you can see it in context. Again, this kind of idea of a very thick wall that served as a thermal mass for the building, and it would kind of snake through and create these 3 zones, body, mind, and spirit, we called them. The wall would be light on one side of the wall and dark brick on the other, so that your kind of view or your perception of the massing would change based on the viewer's perspective. These are some some of the ground floor plan. KB was talking about fear. So one of the security is a huge issue in urban high schools. So this kind of control center here, there's sort of two control centers. This receptionist can look at this outdoor plaza into the library, into this multi-purpose space, and down the corridor here. This is the second floor. There's an academy here with a commons, which you see here, that looks down over that entry plaza, and then kind of the arts wing with art and music rooms. This is the third floor. Note that there's the clerestory lighting brings natural daylight into the corridor, and then there's little windows above the lockers there you can see. So you're getting indirect light into the classroom, natural light from two sides into every classroom. One of the features that we built into the school was that certain components of the school, the gym and the library namely, could be used by the community when the school was closed. So a lot of these schools are going in neighborhoods that maybe don't have libraries, don't have recreational facilities. So by doing this, the neighborhood can get both a school and a library, a recreation center, and so forth. So this is the entrance to the library. When the school is closed, you enter it through a raised reading garden that pulls students off the street, which is a little bit dangerous in this part of town. This is the gym entrance, which is immediately adjacent to playing fields. That idea really came from this project that we did in 2003. It's the competition for the Perth Amboy High School, which we won in January of 2004, and it was a high school for 500,000 square feet for 3,000 students in Perth Amboy, New Jersey. And Perth Amboy, similarly, was a demographic of kind of lower income neighborhood, a lot of recent immigrants, and not many amenities, not great libraries or facilities. So the building was designed almost like a civic cultural center superimposed over a high school, where the communal functions, like the gym, the auditorium, and so forth, were housed in these towers that would come down and spike through the classroom, and that the community could come at night and use the library and the gym and so forth without going into the school. So the design is kind of exploded here in these three systems. These are the towers that house these communal functions, the gym, the library, auditorium. This is, we call a barscape. It's a one-story system of kind of academic tissue or classrooms that would span over this mat, which is the surface of the site, that would be high at either end and low in the center. So we do all our parking on grade and then come up vertically through the building. So this is the mat level plan in the section. You can see how the site is high on either end and then low and flat in the center. So this is where we would park the cars underneath the building and then come up into courtyards and so forth. So somebody from the community coming at night that wants to go to the library could kind of drive in and park near the library and go directly in the tower without entering the school. This is an image from this kind of parking level going up to one of these entry courtyards that then in turn lead into the building. This is the main classroom level plan, or barscape plan as we were calling it. The school is divided into 6 academies that were keyed into the local economy, so kids could graduate from school and then go right into a job. Each of those academies was anchored by a tower. So for example, this is the Performing Arts Academy and anchored by the auditorium. These 3 spaces are the outdoor courtyards from which, from the parking you enter into. Those are entry courtyards. There are also outdoor classrooms and spillover space for events, let's say a graduation kind of happening in the auditorium could spill out into those protected courtyard spaces. Like an organism, the building was designed so that it could expand over time, so it could increase in capacity 25%, so that the towers, think of those as kind of vital organs, and then this is sort of tissue, could sort of grow to expand with demand. The towers were coded with graphics so that people coming from the community would understand, and then they had these graphics on them. So somebody who's trying to find the library would know to go to the yellow tower. Also in a school that's for 3,000 students about on a 16-acre site, they serve as navigating devices inside, once inside the school, to find your way around the school. The spatial idea, there's a little kind of the tectonics are, it would be sort of a platform made of double T's, precast double T's here, and then kind of a light gauge metal construction forming this bar scape, and then the towers kind of coming down through conventional brace steel frame construction there. And so the kind of formal idea is really an agglomeration of very simple forms. Sort of, we were searching for more of a spatial complexity and a formal simplicity. So the forms mean nothing in and of themselves. It's just when they're combined and kind of looking through spaces, being kind of in one space and looking through a second space to a third space. So this is kind of a theme in my work, which we picked up on the Gary Comer Youth Center. This is this notion of spatial layering, or being in one space and looking at a third space through a second space, where you can be both actor and spectator at the same time. This is a view early in the design process of sort of being in the entryway, looking through the cafeteria into the gym and then out the other side of the building. This is the Gary Comer Youth Center. It was originally designed as a sort of practice and performance space for the South Shore Drill Team, which is a kind of a dance troupe and performing arts troupe. Here you can see them practicing in the building. When we were designing the building, it started as sort of a gym, a practice space, but quickly grew into a youth education and recreation center, and really to provide kids a constructive environment in their after-school hours. Because this is located in a neighborhood that was prone to a lot of drugs and gangs and a lot of problems. So the idea was to kind of give them a constructive environment to spend the after-school hours. So this is the drill team practicing in the gym, and this is kind of looking up through the cafeteria to the rec room, and then this is from a bridge looking through the outdoor courtyard and then on into the gym. The partie is comprised of kind of the main spaces for the drill team here in the center, and then a series of programmatically indeterminate bars that would wrap around that space that we could plug in programs over time. So over the course of design, over the course of construction, even after construction, the program was changing so quickly on a weekly basis. We adopted that strategy so that we can continue designing the building while the owner came up with new ideas of new programs that he wanted to include. This is the ground floor plan. There's two entrances. This is sort of street entrance here, parking lot entrance, and there's a large lobby. Out of this wall here, you can see seats are deployed, 625 seats. These doors open up. There's a large stage here, and that gym transforms into a theater. On the upper left is kind of the day-to-day mode of that space, and then on the right you can see with the seats deployed, there's a large wall that opens up and reveals a very deep stage. You can see panels in the ceiling open up. There's stage lighting up there. And then the two inset photos on the lower left are the actual kind of the space in theater mode. They have about 25 performances there a year. This is the second floor. You can see some of that kind of these wrapping bars that wrap around and have very different programs. This is a dance room here, which you see here. Exercise room, rec room, which you see here. This is music and band rooms and an art room. Up on the third floor, something similar arrangement, classrooms, exhibition space, which you see here. Little recording studio, art room again, computer lab. All of this looks out onto this large roof garden, which is planted with 2 feet of soil. So the owner wanted to do some kind of green roof. We talked to them about, since the concept of the building was really about youth education, let's make this an outdoor horticultural classroom. So it has 2 feet of soil. They can, the idea is the kids can grow and harvest food crops and then take them down to the ground floor, the kitchen space, and use those in the kitchen in culinary arts classes. This is the section so you can kind of see what's going on. This is the roof garden up here. These are the round skylights that bring natural light into the gym and cafeteria below. Here's the gym, cafeteria. This is kind of an outdoor terrace here, entry. And then the LED tower was signage to announce upcoming events in the center, as seen, which could be seen from an adjacent elevated highway. Also, one of the problems with the neighborhood is it really didn't have an identity like other neighborhoods in Chicago, like Hyde Park, Lincoln Park, the Gold Coast. And so, although it did have a name, Grand Crossing, we wanted to bring a certain sort of sense of centeredness to the neighborhood, so that tower sort of functions as the center of the community and an identifying element, much like a church steeple in a medieval town, let's say. The exterior cladding is a rain screen cladding of fiber cement panels, as you see here. So that inset photo you can see, I'm having a hard time. Okay. So here, the building is really comprised of layers here. So you have kind of, it's a braced steel frame building. There's block infill, there's waterproofing that goes on the block. There's this blue stuff is insulation on the outside of the building for energy performance. And then this kind of black layer goes on, and then furring. And then finally, the most outboard layer is the cement panels. So more and more architecture is moving towards this kind of construction, so away from more monolithic materials that do a number of different things, like an old masonry building, and more towards an architecture comprised of a number of layers in sort of an assembly where each layer is identified with a specific role, and this outer layer has more of a public role. And I think it calls into question, the question I put up on the wall: can construction still form the basis of architecture? I think that's an open question, and one maybe that your generation will have to answer. This is the idea of the fiber cement panels. They're meant to refer to the colored flags and uniforms of the drill team. The drill team didn't want any windows because of the occurrence of drive-by shootings in the neighborhood, so we kind of surreptitiously, bless it, we kind of surreptitiously fit windows into here. We were also worried about graffiti, so that we could come back later and replace one of these panels if it ever got graffitied, and I'm happy to say that it hasn't. Of course, a lot of study goes into this. These are some of the early studies where we write an algorithm and then manually or visually sort of modify it to get that final pattern. This is a view from the alley, looking at the art room. And then the building at night, the sort of transposed. So in the areas where we did have glass, we ended up using bulletproof glass here, here, and here. The rest of it is natural glass, typical float glass. So that was in 2006. In 2010, we built this high school, which is a charter high school, just north of the youth center. So the foundation realized that the kids in this neighborhood didn't really have any options in terms of, or many options in terms of education. They had the local public school, which was underperforming, but no real kind of college prep options. So they brought in a charter school network operator and opened Gary Comer College Prep. So the high school was in the youth center for the first 2 years of its operation, and then moved into this building adjacent. We also realized that the youth center was underutilized at the time. Okay, so during the daytime when the kids were in school, it was lying empty most of the time. So the idea here is that this is mostly classrooms and offices, and kids would walk back and forth to here to go to the cafeteria, the gym, music rooms, art rooms, and so forth. So the two buildings would form a campus. That would allow the high school to be very lean in its design. So we took kind of what were secondary materials on the youth center and made those primary materials. That stainless steel wraps all the way around the building. The spring green cladding really refers to kind of the youth and optimism of the teachers in the school, most of whom are in their 20s and in the Teach for America program. So a lot of kind of very high energy young faculty members. These are some views of kind of a little plaza area. We wanted to get the kids off the street because in a neighborhood like this, the kids going to the charter school are something of targets to the other kids that are in gangs and so forth. So there's a little area where they can kind of hang out before and after class. This is a view kind of looking from the second floor back towards the youth center with the drill team performing. This is, you can see here how the sort of corrugated stainless steel fencing becomes the facade of the building. You'll notice that we carried that perforated metal across the windows, and that's for safety and security, which I'll talk about in a minute. These are some views of kind of a gated area. We have a gate that closes off that little plaza for security reasons during the daytime. As I said, we ran this corrugated metal, perforated metal across the windows for security. It gave the building a very sort of streamlined look, but also served a couple functions. One is it makes it very difficult to see in the building from outside during the daytime, but very easy to see out from inside to outside. So because of the predominance of drive-by shootings and violence in the neighborhood, we felt that was important. It's also, in a secondary way, sort of a sun shading for the buildings. This is kind of a ground floor plan here. You can see a very straightforward layout of classrooms, kind of ringing a core space with offices, circulation. This is a little tiered college classroom here because the whole goal of the building is really to get kids thinking about college from the minute they walk in the door. So my firm did all the graphics here of the college crest and the motto of the school and so forth. But you'll also notice that I can't figure out this pointer. You'll also notice the skylights running down the length on the interior. That brings light down into the center of the building. So we're getting light from the exterior. We're also getting it right down in the center of the building. This is the second floor, similar arrangement here. But you'll notice all the classrooms have glass walls on the corridor. So here you're in the corridor, you're looking through a classroom and then out to the alley. You're looking through the perforated siding there. This happens to be an English classroom. But the idea of this glass was really to reinforce the school's kind of ethos of responsibility and transparency. Okay? So the architecture is not just merely kind of reflecting their goals, but it's actively sort of shaping the culture of the school. This actually evolved out of the time they spent in the youth center, because the exhibition room, the glassy exhibition room that looked out onto the roof garden, turned out to be the most popular classrooms with the teachers that taught there. So we actually said, well, let's do that everywhere in the new building. So that's how that happened. This is this kind of phenomenon here of kind of what the building looks like on the outside during the daytime, and then this is inside looking out. So here you have a section. This is the skylight that runs the length of the building, a little green roof up here. The second floor is pulled back, so in kind of a balcony condition, so that natural daylight can get down to the ground floor. And then this is the corridor glazing, so you're getting natural light from both sides, from inside and from the outside. We also do, thought I'd show you one of our kind of quirky renovation projects. This is a project we won in a competition a few years ago. This is in Washington, D.C. This is an old commercial laundry that was converted to residential use. So this is where the linens of the White House would have been cleaned at one time. And we converted it to residential. And we noticed in kind of looking at the existing building that it had a very unique physical history. There was a lot of sort of character to the walls, these sort of irregularly spaced joists and so forth. And we felt that the strategy should really be to preserve as much of this character as possible, and then almost overlay kind of the new elements of the design and kind of insert them almost like furniture. So the quality of the project would be the sum total of these two parallel realities. You'd have this kind of old shell here, and then this new millwork which was inserted inside. So in the units, we'd have these kind of millwork kitchen and bathroom sort of units that would slip in there, and then in the public spaces we had this hot rolled plate steel. So this is actually a bridge that connects two parts of the second floor, and a plate steel stair in the lobby. This is kind of looking into that bridge that leads from the elevator area into the fitness area. This is kind of looking through the bridge into the fitness area. The units in the center here are duplex units, so they have a living space on the ground floor and then a stair that takes you up to a bedroom level. And then this is a view of one of those units. And then these units on the end were flat, so this photo here is taken inside of this unit here. Some of the plate steel entryways. As KB mentioned, we do a certain amount of speculative projects. Several years ago, I was asked to come up with an idea for the old post office in Chicago. The old post office was built in 1920. It was the largest post office in the world when it was built because of all the catalogs being shipped out of Chicago from Sears and Montgomery Wards and so forth. It's been a vacant for many years now. It's about 3 million square feet of space, and so it has a very robust structure, which has kind of defied its conversion into residential use or hotel use. So we proposed converting it to a municipal mausoleum. So as you can see in this kind of montage of the Birkeland painting, kind of hoping that maybe inspiring a ritual that would become specific to Chicago, where funeral barges would go down the Chicago River. So here's the location of the building. This is the Chicago River here. We proposed this extension, which would reorient the building away from the city and towards the river. This is a little kind of landing here and a ramp leading you up to the building. So funeral barges would come down the river. There would be kind of a landing here and then a ramp that would take you up to these very large Corten steel doors. The doors open and reveal the old post office lobby, which now would be lined with these funeral chapels on one side. And then a bank of elevators would take you from the funeral chapel upstairs into the crypt level, where the crypts would be stacked 6 high. This is a floor plan of a typical floor, where you could get a sense of the size of the floor plate. I think it was 300 by 800 feet. So 90,000 crypts and niches on one floor. That's everybody that would die in the city of Chicago over 4 years could be stored on one floor of this building. This is the crypt, which is made out of glass fiber reinforced concrete. There's be a little stone plaque and then a little reliquary so that you could put mementos that would tell the story of that person's life. So that when you're walking amongst the crypts and looking directly or frontally at the crypts, it's all about the individual and their life. But then when viewed obliquely, that wall would just dissolve into a single reflective plane. These are some views of the exterior. So this is the extension we were proposing. It would be an open-air facade so that there would be no heating and cooling needs for the building. There's a highway that runs through the building currently. We proposed recladding that to kind of punctuate that moment from which you enter the city underneath this building. That project led to this. Recently, the same group came back and asked us to rethink about Chicago's neighborhoods, specifically the neighborhood around Loyola University in Chicago on the north side. And what we proposed was basically a new L train for Chicago that would be a suspended maglev train to kind of clean out the station. This red tower would become a car sharing tower. So this would be a storage tower for electric smart cars. So you could hop on the L, take it into town, rent a car and do your errands and so forth, bring it back and get it back on the train. This is a little drawing showing how the new system could be installed while the old L train was still in operation, and then the old L train would be removed, leaving only the new system. These are some views of the current state of the L, which is now over 100 years old, and it's kind of crumbling before our eyes and really kind of undermining Chicago's ability to compete with other global cities. This is a section through the proposal. So here you have the structure for the train structure. The cars would be suspended from that structure. Up on top, there would be kind of a speedway for bikers and joggers to get quickly downtown and get them off the streets. It's a real problem in Chicago. Cars and bicyclists are always kind of competing for territory. And then it would open up the kind of ground plane for more public space, a public plaza where people could kind of come and interact. This is a view of kind of the top where the traffic would be broken into different lanes for bikes and joggers and Segway riders and so forth to kind of encourage more sustainable modes of transportation. This is from the train platform level looking down on this new kind of public plaza here. with the car share tower in your immediate left. This is this proposed public plaza with trees here. You would combine it with a bus stop so you could get off the bus and right on the train. The area under the tracks would now be freed up for markets, farmers markets for local produce, or food trucks, or things like that. We also wanted to harness piezoelectric energy, so the daily traffic that would go up and down that stair would generate the electricity to light the platform at night. And this is the car share tower, so there would be an elevator that would take the car and store it. It would be naturally heated and ventilated, and then below it, it would collect water on top in a cistern in the foundation that would be used to irrigate the plantings that would be put in the plaza. This happened to be a stop on the red line, so there's kind of an identity component to this, so that explains why the tower is red. So it's kind of a signpost for the entry of the Loyola campus and also the Loyola stop on the red line. I'll show you a couple competitions we recently did. We do about 1 or 2 of these a year. This is a recent competition to design a memorial for Daniel Burnham in Chicago. So Burnham, in case you haven't studied him, was the one who kind of opened up the lakefront in Chicago as a kind of a public green space, among other things, coming up with the plan of 1909 and so forth. So the idea, monuments are usually an object. I said, well, what if we did a monument that was a space? Okay, so the idea is to create a space here that people would pass through and could ascend up to this level on the museum campus. So here's the planetarium, aquarium, the field museum here, and then you enter this area underneath Lakeshore Drive, which was rerouted several years ago, and you're about 20 feet below the level of the museum. So this would be a way to kind of get people up. This also marks the entrance to Burnham Park, which runs along the south edge of Chicago. So the scale of this monument would really be scaled to that larger landscape. These are some of the intended results of it. This is kind of existing. You have a lot of conflicting geometries here. You have kind of a Beaux-Arts geometry. You have a kind of Olmstedian looping pathways and kind of new things. We'd clear all that up, restore some of the green space that Burnham had dedicated his life to providing. You enter this area, as I said, underneath Lakeshore Drive. So this is the view you would get coming to the memorial. You would enter along this path. You'd come into a tree grove here, and then up a stair and ramp up to the level of the forecourts of the museum. This this is kind of entering into this tree area. The surface of the ground would change to decomposed granite, so you'd hear this kind of granite crunching beneath your feet, and you'd be walking through these trees. Inscribed on the wall would be Burnham's famous dictum here. And then the location of the stair would realign and restore the axial approach to the Beaux-Arts aquarium. You'll notice on the left here, there's kind of a portrait, or sort of a smear portrait of Burnham. The idea was that Burnham's picture would be plasma cut into this steel ramp here. And it's kind of references this painting that you may have seen Hans Holbein the Younger's Ambassadors. This is on display in the National Gallery in London. But it's basically these two brothers that were explorers, and they're kind of shown with all their worldly things that they've kind of picked up in their travels and all their worldly elements. And then there's this kind of white smear of paint on the bottom of the painting, which if you look at it from a certain direction, collapses into a skull. So of course, when you see the skull, of course, the brothers are then kind of, their image is distorted, suggesting, what is reality here and what is illusion. So in a similar way, standing at the base of that ramp, the image or the portrait of Burnham would kind of come into focus here. So you could enter through this and pass through this and either see Burnham or choose not to see Burnham, almost suggesting that perhaps it's time that we forget him and move on. Of course, we didn't win this competition, but this is a competition for a chapel on a retirement village, Air Force retirement village in Texas that we recently did. And there's a huge campus of buildings kind of scattered all over, mostly low buildings. And the site for the chapel was here. So we proposed this kind of low one-story sort of narthex that you kind of walk into, and then this sort of three-sided tower over the sanctuary, which would become a visual marker that one could see anywhere on this campus, which was very kind of disorienting. This is a view of kind of the chapel garden that you would enter through. The detailing of the walls kind of references aluminum sort of airplane technology. The image there is kind of inside the narthex looking out to the chapel garden. We would use local materials like Texas oak and limestone, as well as materials more identified with the aeronautical industry. This is inside the sanctuary, so you come in, there's a sort of a chancel screen here that is derivative of Air Force camouflage uniforms, and then this very large lantern that brings natural light into the front of the church. It would be three-sided tower, so kind of shaped like this, and come down on 3 points representing the Trinity. And because of this shape, as you moved around the campus, the shape of the tower would appear to change as you moved around. The design of it would be 2 layers of glass with a kind of a diagrid. This is called a Isotope Deck, I think it's called. Isotopic deck, where you'd have kind of a diagrid of aluminum sandwiched between 2 layers of glass, translucent glass. So this is the idea, is you could see this would become a marker anywhere within the landscape. And then at night, you'd see its reflection in the man-made lake that the campus is organized around. I'm going to spend the rest of my time talking about a building we finished last summer, the Poetry Foundation in Chicago. So I'll give you the kind of the short history of the Poetry Foundation, which is Poetry magazine was published in Chicago since 1912 on a monthly basis. It was started by a woman named Harriet Monroe. It published without a gap for decades, but always on a shoestring budget. About 10 years ago, out of the blue, they received a gift of $200 million from a pharmaceutical heiress in Indianapolis named Ruth Lilly. With that money, they started a foundation, and one of the first things the foundation did was decided that they needed a home for poetry. Okay, so they needed a place where they could do poetry readings. They needed a place where they could have a gallery with kind of items related to poetry. They needed a library where people could come in and read poetry. They also needed office space for their magazine and so forth. But one of the unusual requirements they gave us was, we want to incorporate a garden in some way in this building. So the early design was centered on how do we create, or how do we combine a garden with a building. So these are some of the earliest kind of sketches I did. These are different strategies for combining a garden with a building. So kind of knotting or overlapping or superimposing or perforating. Then kind of taking those strategies and putting them on the site, making them site-specific, which of these work, which don't. So these are maybe half of the kind of the early study models, trying out kind of different ideas on the site. We all gravitated towards this scheme, in which the garden is created almost by kind of scooping out the garden out of a virtual volume as described by the boundary of the L-shaped site. And then kind of the idea in the building is that this would not be something that would intended to shock you or something you would slam on your brakes and look at, but really more of an unfolding sequence of spaces, right? An unfolding spatial narrative that you would have to walk through to understand, okay? So you wouldn't get it in one, it's not a one-liner. You wouldn't get it in one image. You would have to actually go through it, like poetry. So it would unfold space by space, almost like a poem unfolds line by line. And like good poetry, might be a building you would come back to and get something more out of the second time you came there and the third time you came there, right? It'd be something that would merit that kind of attention. These are some of the early models in the context, mostly residential towers kind of around the site. It's an early sketch kind of showing the kind of organization of the building. Here's the site. It's sort of L-shaped. It's deeper here and then kind of shallower up at this end. There's an alley, Z-shaped, that runs behind it, and then two main kind of streets here, Dearborn and Superior. So we would put the garden here, have the spaces look out on the garden, and then all the kind of offices and enclosed cellular spaces would kind of wrap or hug the perimeter in this kind of a centrifugal way. So this is kind of laying out the structural grid of the building. This is the garden here, some of the main areas with the offices back here. This is later on. This would be in design development. So this is an internal drawing which describes the kind of tectonic idea of the building, which is that of a building comprised of a series of layers of different materials that would come together and separate to create the spaces that comprise this kind of spatial narrative we're talking about. Okay? So there's the blue represents glass, this is wood, and the black would represent this kind of oxidized zinc, this black zinc that would wrap all the way around the project. So the layers might come very close to each other, but then separate out to create the main garden space and so forth. These are some drawings of these different layers. This is the wood layer. It starts in the library here at this end, then kind of wraps around the second floor, comprises the working library for the staff upstairs, before dropping back down and wrapping around the performance space, which is where the poets would do the readings. Glass wall would move in and out to kind of compress the space in certain areas and then expand it in others and allow kind of a connection between the public spaces and, and the garden spaces. The garden is really conceived of as sort of a plate of concrete or a slab that would roll inside the building. So the public spaces inside, the library, the gallery, the performance space, would feel almost like they're part of the garden as well. And then finally, this kind of layer of oxidized zinc that wraps around the building. It's continuous, and then where it bounds the garden, it becomes perforated to allow views into the garden from the street. Early model kind of showing the layout of the garden. So you would enter off the corner. The garden is kind of a sanctuary space here that would mediate between the enclosed building and the street outside. You would enter the building by walking through the garden. Top model shows kind of the spaces, how all the interior spaces are oriented out towards the garden. And then this kind of mysterious quality of kind of looking through the screen into a garden and people kind of almost drawing people in, kind of intriguing them. These are early construction photos. There are two buildings on site that were torn down in an asphalt parking lot. This is the site plan here. So you have the exterior garden that wraps around here in kind of an interlocking fashion with the building. The ground floor is where the main public spaces are. So you have the performance space. This is where the poetry readings are held. You have the library where poetry is read, and then a gallery of changing exhibits that connects the two. This is the exterior garden here. So you would enter on the edge and then walk through the garden. These little moss strips would define a subtle path, and the idea there is to kind of slow people down, right? So poetry demands a lot of concentration. So to kind of get the distractions out of your head, prepare yourself mentally for the art form inside. This is the step. So this is the only signage is on the step as you enter, as you leave the city. This is the sidewalk, city sidewalk. So you step up onto this, a couple steps onto this raised plinth, and that was to kind of give a sense of removal, that you're leaving the city, you're kind of entering this kind of new world. This is what the building looks like from across the street. You can see how the layers sort of coming together here, the zinc, the glass, and the wood. This is a view kind of looking down into the garden area here. From across the street, at the end of the day, this kind of screen would take on different characters depending on the light conditions. during the day. So this would be late in the day, afternoon, maybe 4 or 5 o'clock. This is the corner where you enter. In this area, there's a little tribute to Ruth Lilly. So you enter in this kind of memorial tribute area. She was remembered on this piece of reflective glass here that has her name etched into it, and that would be backlit, so that could be seen 24 hours a day. And it would reflect the trees, almost saying, you know, as if to say, without her generosity, none of this would be possible. So as you move toward the main garden through this kind of narrow passage here. It's about 10 feet wide, kind of winding through the trees, and then you come out into the main garden here, and the first thing you see is a wall of books announcing that you're entering a literary environment. Okay? So the space is intended to be something of a sanctuary in the city, place of quiet contemplation, also kind of a program space. They would have readings out here, they would have openings for the magazine, things like this. This is the garden at night. This is from the street looking through into the building, so your eye stops several times. First it stops at the screen, and then at the trees, and then at the glass wall, and then inside to increase the perceived depth of that space. Again, as I mentioned, we wanted to pull kind of the garden plate from the outside to the inside. This is a close-up of the concrete, which we spent a lot of time developing. Concrete, as you know, has four ingredients: is water, cement, sand, and rocks. So we spent quite a bit of time identifying the rocks. We used a white silica sand. We used a white cement, and the little bits of black are slag that we threw in. That's a byproduct of the steel manufacturing process, and then we sandblasted it all. So the approach to the materials in the building is really sort of a transcendent materiality, I would call it. So taking something very humble and transforming it in a way. Okay, so very ordinary materials in the building: concrete, corrugated metal, plywood, drywall. But it's more what you do with them. So it's akin to what a poet does with words. So any 4-year-old would understand that those words, right? What makes it poetry is the selection and arrangement, the spaces between the words and the lines, right? So that's the kind of the idea we were trying to bring through the architecture. Not special in and of itself, but special because of what you do with it. These are early samples we did. After we had identified the aggregate, we're looking at different mixes here and different levels of sandblasting. You can see there's kind of more of a sandblast on this side and less on this side. When we think we have it, we do a mock-up. So this is done on site. That red tubing is a glycol tubing. It's a snow melt system that was built into the slab so that they would never have to shovel or salt the slab. There's also conduit in there. There's rebar. There's aeration piping for the trees to aerate the soil. So we try to kind of come up with every condition we can think of and put it in this slab. So here's like a little piece of foundation wall, because there's one area where the slab comes up against the foundation wall. This is a moss pit. This is a tree pit. This is a little channel for glazing. This is a little trench that we fill with gravel inside. So we're trying to identify kind of every condition that we're going to encounter. These are actually pour joints, okay? So this panel was poured separately from that one and from that one. And then the lines moving east-west are control joints that are cut in with a saw. This is the final product. There's 3 types of trees here, as you can see them listed there. These trees will grow to be about 25, 30 feet tall, almost as tall as that space when they're mature. They will be pruned so that the canopy starts at about 7 or 8 feet. So when these trees are mature, maybe 8 to 10 years, the canopy will form another room within that room that is the outdoor garden. This is a close-up of the concrete slab. You can see this is a pour joint here. This is a control joint cut in with a saw. That's the moss, of course, and then this is the tree pit. So in the tree pit, we used loose stone that was the same aggregate that we used in the concrete. This is coming towards the entrance of the building at night. And then once inside the building, looking into the library, which is located here. There's 35,000 volumes in the library, and the idea was to kind of have books on 3 walls and then look out into the garden on the 4th wall. All of these books were review copies that the magazine had received over the decades that were in a basement of a library in Chicago. So for the first time, these were made accessible to the public. This is a diagram of the wood here. You can see kind of the shelving wrapping around. It's made of Baltic birch plywood. We expose the edges of the plies. This is the glass system, which is actually a kind of a custom designed, custom engineered system that spans 36 feet. It's a unitized system, so that means it comes to the site in a single panel that's 1 meter wide and 36 feet tall, and then it kind of connects into the next one. This is looking towards the performance space, so we wanted to remember Harriet Monroe. This is a gallery for changing exhibits related to poetry. This is the graphic we put on the wall of Harriet Monroe, which we kind of digitized from an old photograph and created a vinyl transfer. And then inside the performance space, looking out into the garden. So the charge of this performance space was to make it perfect for the spoken word, such that a poet could come in here, read her poetry without any amplification. Okay? There's 2 challenges there, acoustically speaking. One is the isolation of the outside noise, which we did with 3 layers of glass. So this is a 3/4 inch monolithic glass with silicone joints, and then 2 more layers of glass 2 feet away in that window framing, which isolates all the street noise. Room acoustics is the other component. So certain walls have to be acoustically reflective, some have to be absorptive, and some have to be diffusive. So this is an image of the diffusive wall. It's basically a striated concrete block that's grouted solid for mass. So what sound waves hit that and scatter in different directions. These walls are acoustically reflective to throw the sound out into the space, and then the back wall is acoustically absorptive. It's actually a fabric. Looks like drywall. This is the stair leading up to the 2nd floor around this bamboo. The open door policy is kind of editorial policy from the first magazine. The bamboo is really to kind of pull the garden into the building and then vertically up through the building to the 2nd floor. This is looking back from the top of the stairs towards the garden. So in this image, you really get the sense of the garden as almost a discrete volume or another room of the building. This is that wood system wrapping around the 2nd floor. There are openings in that wood wall through which private offices and conference rooms and so forth. And then the open office area looks out into the garden below. So these are 3 open office areas here, here, and here, and views out into the garden. This is kind of looking simultaneously from the inside out at the garden and then down inside to the gallery below. This is looking back from the work area through the garden at night back into the building, into the library. This layer of zinc, as I said, wraps around the building and becomes perforated at the garden. These were some of the early studies that we did as to what should be the character of this zinc screen. Looking at different materials. These are kind of perforation studies. We're looking at different degrees of perforation here. And the color of the, what will the impact of the color of the supporting structure be? Once we have that figured out, we do more detailed drawings. These are digital models of the screen and its structure. And then we make a full-size mock-up. So this is a 36-foot tall mock-up of the screen. You'll notice the structure is a little bit different here and here. We're still kind of looking at a couple different ways to do it. And then a section through the garden, and then another elevation kind of looking through this kind of veil-like screen, which would give the kind of building a sense of mystery. This is the alley elevation, so you can see how the zinc wraps all the way around, even over the windows. And then this is where it borders on the garden. So here you can see it transitioning from solid to perforated here, looking into the garden. This kind of quality of when you look at the building obliquely, it looks monolithic and solid, but when you look at it in a normal direction, it becomes more veil-like and diaphanous. And then these are that same issue. This is kind of looking, as you approach the building, looking down the street and then looking straight through the screen from the sidewalk. Screen was black because black connotes kind of authority and seriousness, and at the same time, I felt the building should have a certain mystery or enigmatic quality where somebody would want to kind of explore it and search and say, what is that building? And kind of go inside and find out that it's about poetry. This is what the building looks like at night. When they're having the readings. So the idea is not that the building is a one-liner. The intent is not to shock. It's not to surprise. It's not about self-expression. It's not about form. I think we're at a crossroads right now in the profession, and if we keep going down the road we're on, we're going to move further and further out into the galaxy. Or we can reassess our priorities, okay? Maybe the role of architecture is not always to shock. Maybe some things need to be confirmed or validated. What do we leave society when the novelty of form has worn off? That's for you guys to decide. Thank you.